Performance and Task Scheduler. In this nugget, we'll be addressing performance and tasks. First of all, with performance, we take a look at Performance Monitor. Now, this is something we've had for a long time, since like NT4 and even before that in various iterations. So we've been using this for quite a long time, and generally speaking, you can kind of get a snapshot of data with real-time analysis, and you can see what's going on right now with your system. So very, very useful for that kind of a thing, but it doesn't actually store the data anywhere, and for that, you want to use data collector sets. Now, there's some pre-configured data collector sets that Microsoft's already put together for us that are really, really good. And so I think you're going to want to use those. And once you've collected a set of data, then you'll have some reports that you can work with. And there's also a command line tool that you can use to export that data to other formats for like spreadsheets or databases and the like. Then there's also Reliability Monitor. And this is another thing I really like because you can go to a computer and quickly and easily identify if it's got a trend or a pattern of problems that have been evolving and compromising overall the reliability of that computer. A very, very useful thing to look at there. And then Task Scheduler. This is much improved in Windows Server 2008 and Windows Vista. And in addition to the Task Scheduler that gives us a great deal of flexibility and very intuitive as well, by the way, we also still have our Scheduled Tasks command line item as well that you should be familiar with also. Did you ever wonder just exactly how well a system performs? I mean, it's kind of subjective. One user might say, hey, my computer boots up really fast and it takes 30 seconds. But another user might say, my computer boots up really slow and it also takes 30 seconds. Of course, with Windows machines, seldom if ever do they take only 30 seconds. Usually it's somewhere around a minute for desktop client operating systems. I kind of had the similar situation with my wife's car. I bought her a brand new Mini Cooper. You can see it right here. I drove it to Death Valley over these dirt roads and things, so it's kind of dirty. Probably should have never taken it out there, but for family reasons I had to let my wife use my SUV while I took this car on a business trip. And as I swung through Death Valley, only about 200 miles out of my way, I decided to see how fast I could get this car on a Nevada desert night. And it was way late at night. There was no other traffic on the highway, so I actually got this thing up to 130 miles an hour, and I still had plenty of room. I just chickened out. So probably by most people's reckoning, that would be a pretty fast speed to go. And yeah, it was probably a little foolish, but hey, it sure was a lot of fun. These things can really go. Well, when it comes to performance in Windows machines, we also need at times to gauge the performance and see how well they're really performing. Because a lot of times, just a subjective opinion won't really be useful for anything, so we need to get a scientific analysis of how these systems perform. Alright then, so how do I go about measuring the performance of this system? Well, first of all, it is still going to be somewhat subjective. I mean, if I have a 60% processor utilization over a period of time on my computer, that might be okay if I'm just checking email and browsing the internet occasionally. But if you have 60% processor utilization on a heavily utilized SQL Server database, that might be too much processor utilization. And you might want to add another SQL Server to help offload some of that burden. Okay, so it's a little bit relative depending on what kinds of things you're doing. Of course, for client workstations, some of this is not quite as critical as it would be, for example, for a SQL Server. Now here in Computer Management, I've already got this open, and you've seen me open it many times before, but I'm going down to Reliability and Performance Monitoring Tools, and Performance Monitor. We'll start to add counters by using the plus sign up here, or you can press Control-I, getting a little tongue twisted there, folks, Control-I, and add some counters. Now, of course, there are dozens, if not some number of hundreds of different counters that you can add into this. So I'm not going to exhaust every one of these counters, nor is it our objective to describe each one of them, because time would fail us for sure. However, you'll see here that when you click the plus sign, you get a whole bunch of different things to pick from. Some of these have more common usage than others. Some are a little bit more esoteric or a little bit more obscure in terms of when you would ever actually use these. But I'll show you probably some of the three common ones that might be of interest to most people. First of all, we'll take a look at some processor performance here, and we can actually processor is where I meant to go, and we can take a look at this and see what the percent processor time is. This is what percentage of the processor time for utilization is going on. So if I select this item, I can choose various instances of the selected object, like total, which would be a total across all of my processors, or all instances of my processors, which in this case is 0 and 1. I actually have a dual-core processor which functions as pretty much two separate processors in terms of the overall performance. And then if I need a little bit more detail about any of these counters, because again, some of them are kind of obscure, then you can click Show Description, and I've kind of run out of resolution here for my screen size. But in your systems, you'll probably be able to read all this a little bit better. So here I'll just go ahead and put in the total here for our processor utilization, and then I'll show you a couple of other counters just for different kinds of things to keep an eye on. There's no secret sauce in terms of these are the ones you must use to keep track of the performance. However, there are some that are kind of packaged together, which we'll look at a little bit later on, which do a good job of giving you a good starting point for your counters that you want to use. One of the other ones I use, though, is the memory item. And with this one, I like to go to available megabytes, and this allows me to see how many megabytes of memory I have left over. And of course, you can be more granular in numbers with bytes or kilobytes if you want, but megabytes is fine for me. And then the last one I'll usually use, just to get started, is probably going to be physical disks. There's also a counter here for logical disk, but really physical disk is going to be more important because you might have 2 or 3 different logical disks. For example, I do right here. I have a drive D, a drive C, and a drive F, but they're all on drive 0. They're all on the same physical disk. So it makes more sense to keep track of the physical disk because that's where your actual performance is going to come from. It's a physical limitation there. And normally, your physical disk is going to be your bottleneck in many cases. And if, in fact, a lot of these things interact. Because if you don't have enough memory, then your computer is going to have to page more often, and therefore you're going to have a higher percentage of disk activity, and that's what's going to slow your system down because it's a mechanical device as opposed to your memory, which is thousands of times faster. Okay, so what we want to look for here in terms of our counters is I usually go to the average disk queue length, and this will identify how many requests are queued up for that disk. And what we want to see is a disk queue length that's a pretty low number, like 1 or maybe 2. Sometimes if you get into 3, 4, 5, higher numbers, then that means that there are several different requests waiting in queue to be serviced by the physical hard disk, but it's too slow to service them any faster. So that's why you're getting kind of a long line, and that's what that's about. A long line of queue requests. So we have a few different ones there, and I'll click OK. And then we'll see that we do have some activity going on here. It's sampling the data about every second, and you can also change that interval if you want to. Now also, I'm going to just pause recording after a bit here and get a few other things going on so we have some more stuff to look at here, and then I'll resume recording once I get a few things kicking up. Alright then, what I've done here is I've let things run for a little while, and I've also added additional process into this. If you look at the color coding here, you'll see that blue is for my processor utilization, or processor time. Green is for the average disk queue length. And if I scroll up, you'll see that red is the available megabytes. And unfortunately, I don't have much resolution to work with here, so these might be a little bit hard to read, but on your screen you should be able to read them a little bit better. But for processor time, for example, let's say that I didn't want to see that anymore because it was a result that was interfering with other things that I was trying to read, for example. I can clear that with the checkbox and no longer view it. And I can put it back by, of course, rechecking it. Also, what I've done in the graph here is I've tried to do something to kick up the processor utilization a little bit by doing this. This is something called the multi-threaded WinBez. This is an old Windows 95 utility. And what it does is you just add these threads. Each one of these represents an individual thread that requires processor utilization. I quite frankly can't get too many of them going because then it starts to interfere with my recording software and it starts to sound strange. So in fact, it may be doing that now, so I better just close this so I don't run into any issues there. Now then, other things you can do with this is if you want to, you can change the view. You can view log data instead, and by clicking on that, it shows me the data source being the current activity. You have a number of different other things you can do here. You can send it out to a database, for example. You can choose what kind of things you want to be able to see in it, specify how often you want to sample the data. Like I said earlier, it's every 1 second to begin with, and it'll do this for 100 seconds. And if you want to do it for longer, certainly you can do that as well if you like to. And then here again is some of the data that we've added in. Let's say that processor utilization, I didn't want to see that in blue. Maybe I wanted to see it in another color, or if this is green, if I'm colorblind, for example, that might not be the best color for me to see. Maybe I want to choose something else that's more visible to me. So certainly those things are available. You can also change the width and the style of the counters to, again, make it more visible for you. And I won't elaborate too much on the rest of these other than to point out you can change the visual appearance of a lot of these different things for your own purposes. Now then, if I decide I don't want any of these counters sometime anymore, then I can go to whatever one, like here's available bytes, and I just click the X up here, and that removes that counter. And if I choose another one, the average is Q length, again, I can remove that as well. And then if I want to change the view of this as well, then I can do that. Right now I'm on a line graph, but if I wanted to, I could choose a histogram bar, or I could choose a report, which would just give me the statistical data in numbers like you see right here. So those are just different ways of looking at that data. Now, again, Microsoft has taken a look at this, and they determined that a lot of administrators don't want to have to cobble together specific number of counters. They would rather just have something that's kind of prepackaged that they might be able to then edit themselves and add and subtract from as necessary. Well, you can do that with data collector sets, which are down under here. And you just go to data collector sets and then system, and we see three key ones right here, actually a few key ones. LAN diagnostics, system diagnostics, system performance, and wireless diagnostics. Let's start out of order here with system performance. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm just going to right-click on it and choose Start, just so that we have some performance monitoring going on here in the background. And if I take a look at this after a few moments, we'll see that it does collect some data in a log file for us. Alright then, I went ahead and let that run. It does run for a minute, so that's all it runs initially, unless you want to change that. You can do that with your own user-defined template instead. What you'll do here is if you like this, but you want to add or subtract a couple of counters or change the interval or how long it logs the data, then you can go up here to user-defined, choose New, Data Collector Set, and then you can create from a template, which is one of these existing ones that we see here in the background, or some other one that you've already custom configured yourself. And then you just click on Next, and you just pick whichever ones interest you, and Next, Next, and Finish. And there's really not much else to it. From that point, then, you can start to edit these things. Whereas with these initial ones that are here by default, you can't really edit those. For example, if I double-click on the performance counter properties there, notice that the Remove button is grayed out, and so is the Add button. I can't really change much of any of this, so I'm really stuck with what I've got, unless I choose a user-defined item. But I'm okay with what we've got there. So what I want to do now is once I've collected this data, and it ran for a minute, I just paused recording while it was running, and then I could go down here to Reports, go down to System, and I can look at System Performance, and here it creates a log of the performance that it just logged for me. It gives it according to a date format, 2008 being the year, 04 April 30th, and this is the first log created on that date. And then, of course, it gives me a date timestamp over here as well. And then what I do is, and I'm going to get rid of this off to the side here so I have a little bit more room to look at it. Then what it does is it just gives me statistical data about what it was able to find out. This is especially useful because sometimes I don't really know, or a lot of people don't really know, how much memory is not enough memory, how much disk utilization is too much. Well, these are somewhat arbitrary according to Microsoft standards, and again, it's very relative numbers, but they will give you like a red button here instead of a green button if your CPU utilization is way overloaded, or if your disk activity is way too high. Then again, here it'll also give you a big red button there instead of a green button. And then if you want to look at the more specific data about all these are kind of summarize the resource overview for you. Then I can select the down arrows next to each individual counter and look at the process. This gives you a lot more detail about the processes that are going on this computer. So pretty handy information and very granular, in fact, depending on the level of detail that you want and need. Also, let me explain a little bit more about what each one of these are. Let's go back up here to System Performance. On the system performance, it's going to log processor, disk, network, memory counters, and there's also this NT kernel tracing, which we don't really use a whole lot, but the big idea with kernel tracing is it's very useful even for a programmatic basis where maybe a developer needs to identify exactly what was going on at specific times, very, very detailed information in the NT kernel. And then there's system diagnostics, where is it? Right there. System diagnostics is all of the same thing as system performance, but it's also going to add even more additional detailed system information. And we're going to use this if we have some like troubleshooting reliability problems or problematic driver, problems, problematic stop errors or blue screens. That sort of thing is what I might do if I'm really running into some hairy problems there. I would use probably the system diagnostics. And you can see again over here to the right that it logs quite a lot of different data there. Also, wireless and LAN diagnostics are just network diagnostics for wired or wireless networks, respectively. And then returning back down here to the actual performance output in the logs that we see down here, let me just identify a couple of other things. Notice that when we get the system performance report, kind of in, words and numbers is what we're looking at pretty much there. You can change the view of that if it makes more sense to you. This is really just a matter of preference as well, or a matter of however you can assimilate data the best. But I can also choose Performance Monitor, and then it looks just like Performance Monitor, and I can see where something might have spiked that might be causing some alarm somewhere, something like that. I can also choose to view over here, and then folder, and it shows me where that's going to be stored in terms of the actual data files that comprise all of the collected data that we've seen. And this is really just a reflection of a physical file location. And if I go to the computer here, then I'll show you that it's on drive C under the perf logs directory, and then underneath whichever collection set you decided to keep. So it was under the system, performance, and then here's the date that we just looked at earlier, and there's the actual files, and so those certainly should look familiar because they're the same things that we see right here. Another thing you want to keep in mind here as well, maybe you want to export this to a different file format. For example, my performance counter here, maybe it needs to be something that I'm collecting from a number of different departments on a sampling of computers across a large enterprise, and I want to see overall how are my systems performing in our company. Do we need new computers or not? Or do we need to upgrade memory or not? And so forth. And if we go to command prompt, then what you'll see here is there is a utility that you can run called relog. And I'll just do a /question mark you see here. But the idea here is if I wanted to output this for something like a SQL database, I can certainly do that. And the option that we would have to do that is just enter in the file name followed by a -f and then SQL if I wanted it to be in SQL, or if I wanted to analyze it in a spreadsheet, I'd probably do a CSV. So you kind of get the idea there how I can output it so that I can use different tools to be able to read and analyze the data. Then I might be able to map some trends and so forth. So then here, after having cleaned up the screen a little bit, I decided to go ahead and type out a command that we could see in action. And so for example, right now I just see the normal data that we saw before up there in my file system. But if I use relog, I can point to that specific location that we're looking at there in the background. A -f, because I would say, maybe I want to see it in a CSV format so I can do some number crunching in a spreadsheet or something. And then a -o to output that into a file. So it's going to go into the same location, and I'm just going to call it perf counter is what I'll just call this. So I'll press enter there, we see some output, and there we see now perf, I thought I saw it in here. Oh, there it is right in there. Perf counter.csv, and if I had Excel installed, then I could then open that up in a spreadsheet and view the data. Alright then, now here I've switched back over to the Reliability and Performance Monitor's top node where I'm focused right now. You can see my mouse pointer. And we'll see another thing that's kind of handy over here as well. It shows us in kind of a summary fashion all of our resource overview. Let me again change the view so we have more to look at here. I'm just going to hide the action pane over to the right, and then we can see a little bit better. So again, just another idea, another way of looking at a lot of the data that we have makes it easier for us to distill down all of the data. And then if you want to see more detail about any of these things, you just click the down item, and it, of course, gives you more information about what's going on the current system, all the processes that are running. I might show you which one's occupying the most CPU time, which one's using the most threads, all of that kind of stuff. Very, very handy data to take a look at. One thing I like this for, by the way, just as a quick side note, CPU utilization is important, of course, and sometimes your system might seem to perform slowly, so you'll want to see what's really chewing up the most CPU utilization. But more than that, what really hits your performance, especially because our today's CPUs are so doggone fast, you're really getting back down to this bottleneck of the disk utilization again. And here's where you're going to see whatever it is that's really chewing up the CPU utilization, or rather the disk utilization, which has the most reads and writes per minute and so forth. And that's where you're going to see a lot of that. Now, let's move on here to the reliability monitor. This, in similar fashion, will also show you how well your system is performing. And this machine actually looks pretty good. I don't really have a lot going on. Now, let's take a look at what we're really seeing here. This one's very clean. Look at the top here. See where it says 10 and then down here to 0? This is on a scale of course, 0 to 10, or actually it's 1 to 10. And the further up, the closer it is to 10, the more reliably the system is performing. Now, this computer appears to be performing very, very reliably, but there's an honest truth to that. You see, on all of these dates, this machine wasn't even turned on. And it'll show you that because it shows you a dotted line in between here, and this is be an indication that either the computer was turned off or it was in a sleep state or something like that. This is a brand new restore from backup. I used the complete PC backup back when I first created this computer, so that if I ever started to run into other problems, I could just kind of re-image it, so to speak. And I recently did that. So what I'm going to do is show you another computer that has had more issues to take a look at here in a moment. So then here I've connected to another computer. This is one of my personal computers that I use, and we've been having some issues with this one. You see that we're not quite up here at the 10 mark right now. We're down close, hovering around 5 and sometimes even less. And what's going on with this system? Well, a lot of it relates to these application failures. Notice how many red X's that I have across on this line, and this categorizes each one of the items. This also, again, makes it very easy to be able to distill down the information, because sometimes we're just kind of awash in way too much information and have difficulty identifying what's relevant. Well, here there's definitely a trend with the specific applications that are failing, and just about every day we've been having troubles here with Outlook. So this is a good example of how the reliability monitor can help to pinpoint specific problems. Not only does it tell me I'm having application failures, it also tells me what application it is that's failing. And really, in this case, we're working with a vendor, but we have a network device that seems to be dropping connections to our server. So Outlook keeps dropping its PST file, and then that causes it to stop responding, and then we have a problem, and then we have PST files that get corrupt, and so it's a whole bunch of fun. But at least we were able to identify what was going on here in terms of our overall stability. And you can see also hardware failures, which you probably won't see as many of those with 64-bit versions of Windows Vista, because the drivers are so much better on 64-bit. And then general Windows failures. You see here we had another issue. Not even sure quite what that was. I haven't looked at it quite yet. But we had Windows failures. Where is it? Down here. The OS stopped working. Well, that's always I do remember that. That was day before yesterday, I think, or maybe it was yesterday. The OS stopped working, and what I got was a blue screen. And that's, we see some error detail over there. Sometimes you can make sense of it, sometimes you can't. But we got the stop screen, or the blue screen of death, as we've always called it. But once again, overall, a great tool for overall kind of finding out trends, seeing patterns of things take place. So you see our reliability has kind of steadily declined as we started to have problems with Outlook and so forth. Also notice that this is a solid line as opposed to a dotted line that we looked at earlier. That's because this has been a live computer that's been able to report its data all along, whereas the other machine was, off for most of those dates. Now here then, let's take a look at something that I think has really made some big strides in the current version of Windows and in Windows Server 2008 as well, and that is the scheduled tasks. We used to have this underneath something else. I'll go ahead and access it first of all. It's under Accessories, System Tools, and I keep calling it Scheduled Tasks because that's what we've called it always in the past. But nowadays we call it Task Scheduler. I don't know why Microsoft has to change the name on things and make a fool out of me because I keep calling them the wrong things. But anyway, here it is. Now, the basic idea with this thing is we can cause a specific task to run based upon our own criteria. And I'm just going to go ahead and create a task, and that'll show you a lot of what you can configure with this. But let me also show you some that already exist in here. For example, this one's kind of cool. This is new. We didn't used to have automatic defragmentation that would run, even though defragmentation software was included with Windows. And this was kind of a hassle because users have to normally be administrators in order to be able to run the defragmentation utility, which I always thought was ridiculous because it doesn't actually change security or stability of anything. It's just something that helps to optimize the system, the same way that emptying the trash can or emptying the recycle bin or emptying temporary files on the system might also help optimize the system, and users can do that too. Well, anyway, enough of my soapbox there. But we see here that there's a default task already here. I did not put this here. It was here in the default installation. And this just simply identifies different things that go on with this. For example, it will run whether the user is logged on or not. That's a good idea because a lot of users might log off at night or something like that. And this is scheduled to run, I think, at 1 o'clock in the morning. So that would be a good idea. You can run with the highest privileges. That helps to ensure that you don't have an account that has insufficient privilege, because remember, you do have to be an administrator for this one to be able to run. You can also hide this task so that users can't see it. And then the trigger here would be on a weekly basis. So we would just simply specify at 1 o'clock, what I guess it's every Wednesday of every week, then this task is enabled. So about once a week at 1 o'clock, we get the task. And this is what it does. It runs the defragmenter with the following syntax. And, that's pretty much it. The rest of these things pretty well explain themselves, so I'm not going to exhaust these for you because they're really well written and I think very, very clear. But just take some time to look through the various checkboxes here. I don't think there's anything here that's kind of obscure or unclear or anything, or else I'd certainly go over it with you individually. But a lot of these things here as well on the settings, also very useful, so that you can delay the task, for example, and delay when it starts, or if the task fails. This can be also very useful if it's a critical task and for some reason it didn't start. You don't know why, but you just want to make sure that it does start whenever it gets a chance again. Well, you can restart it every however many minutes. Notice also that these checkboxes and all the options here for a lot of these things they're all grayed out. Not much I can do with these. They're all, there's nothing I can do. Well, that's the way it is with a lot of these default tasks that appear here. So if I go back over here, there's nothing that I can do to change any of them. If I really don't like this the way it is, and I want to create kind of my own version of reality with this task, then I can do that too. I can simply right-click here to choose Export, and then you can export it as an XML file, and then you'll be able to modify this as you want. What I would then do is I'd go back up to the Scheduled Tasks library. I'd select it, first of all. Then I'd right-click and choose Import Task, and then it would go ahead and import the task that I had exported if I just have to, go find it. So very, very useful utility here. I like this quite a lot. Also shows a history on, whether or not it missed a task or anything like that. I recently re-imaged this machine, so I did that just today, in fact. So it hasn't actually even had a chance to run this utility yet. But it gives me a little bit of history of what's gone on with it so far. Now let me also show you how I would create my own task. If I go up here to the Task Scheduler library, I can right-click and choose Create Basic Task, which takes you through a very simple wizard. This is just the easiest thing in the world. It's very, very easy wizard to run. You can also just click Create Task, and I'll just click there. Notice that this does not give me a wizard. It gives me all the same options that we saw when we looked at the Defragmenters task as well. So then you just kind of manually click through things until you get what you want. I'm just going to, real quickly here, go to the Create a Basic Task, though, just so that we can quickly get something running. And then we can go back to the same options if we want to a little bit later on. So I'll say this, let's say that if I have an application that crashes, it's a real bummer, and I've kind of just recently gotten turned on to that. I don't even know how you pronounce it, but that Mahjong game, not the gang, but the game, where is it? Mahjong Titans, yeah, that thing. I kind of recently gotten turned on to that. So let's say that if app crashes, run, if I can spell, Mahjong. Who knows if that's how you spell that, okay? And the description would be, you deserve a break, okay? So, if an application crashes, we could run that. Now, of course, you could substitute whatever you want for this when it comes to the action, which we'll come to a little while later on here. Right now, I'm going to set this up so that if something crashes, it runs a game for me. But it could just as easily launch some kind of a script that would send notifications to an application. This could be a really good way to collect data across your enterprise so that you can identify, maybe in a pilot program, for example, how often a new application crashes, or how often a new beta program crashes. It can send messages. It can send an email if you want to a specific account, maybe some kind of a monitoring account or something like that. So, great deal of flexibility with what you can do with this. And then, when do you want the task to start? And these all explain themselves. In terms of time when they start. You could say when the computer starts. That might be useful if you have a specific kind of a task that you want to run regardless of who is logged on, or regardless of if anybody's logged on at all. You can also say when a specific user logs on. That's normally going to be the case if somebody has to be able to see an action take place or interact with maybe a piece of software that you launch with this task scheduler. I'm going to say when a specific event is logged, because look, we were looking for the application errors, that kind of thing. So in my log, it's going to be the application event log, and of course you can pick from whatever makes sense for you, for your current purposes. And then the source would be application error, and there it is right there. And then the event ID I just happen to know is 1000, but you wouldn't have to put in a specific event ID if you didn't want to. This is just going to narrow it down more. If there's more than one kind of application error, maybe 1001, 1002, whatever else there is, then it would not run for those. Only for this one that's 1000. And then I'm going to start a program, but you can see here, it can send an email, display a message. Don't really see a lot of use for that because it'll display that message locally. So that would probably be only useful if there was some kind of a event you're trying to track that takes place that you don't actually see a visual interaction for, and the user would have to be notified for. But I'm just going to run a program, and I'm going to browse for, where is it? All the games nowadays are under program files. So if we go down to, I think it's under Microsoft Games. There it is. Then there's my Mahjong. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Anyway, there it is. And you can add arguments or start it in a certain directory or something like that if you want as well. And then I just next, and that's pretty much it. Here I simply have a summary. If I want to look at the more detailed information, I can click the properties for it when I click on Finish, which is what I'm about to do. And this just, again, takes me to the exact same interface that I would have had if I had chosen to create a task, not a basic task, but to create a task by itself. And then, of course, I can change any of these things that I want, which I've already addressed. Alright, so now one thing we can do is, and I like to do this, is when I create a new task, I want to make sure that it's going to run. So I'll right click here and I'll just choose run to see if it's going to happen. I don't want to turn this loose on the network or something and then have it crash or generate blue screens or something. Apparently this works pretty well, so we'll let that go. It looks like it's going to do its job. Now I've got my special little application, my BATapp32, which I talked about in a previous video, previous nugget. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this thing, and we're going to have a deliberate crash to an application, and we're going to see then if this application runs, and there it certainly does. My little game popped up here in the back, and we now have a game launched here. Wow, it's sure tempting not to just play this. But hey, anyway, oh, I got to move right there. See? Anyway, I'll better close this up and move right along. You should also be aware of a command line equivalent for scheduled tasks. And if I just go to a CMD here, that'll be this SCHTASKS. Okay? Or SCHT, did I spell that right? Yes, I did. Okay, and if I just press enter, that shows me the scheduled tasks that are already set up on this system. That's just kind of informational. But it goes beyond that, so let me just run this again with a /question mark and identify some of the different things that you can do. And one thing in particular would be very useful, and I would pay attention to this because it could be a very important exam objective. But you could do scheduled tasks, and then what you could do is to change the scheduled task. And then if I do this, schedule a task and then change, and then a /question mark, we'll see that the available options for us allow us to do things such as delay a task. For example, maybe I've got, what was that task we saw earlier? The disk defragmenter. Maybe I've got that scheduled to run every night at 1 a.m., just the way it already is. However, maybe I've got a specific department in my organization that works with heavy number crunching and very disk-intensive automated things that take place during off hours, also at 1 a.m., but they only do it this week. Maybe they do it during quarterly reports or something like that. Well, they don't want the scheduled task of the disk defragmenter to run for them. So what I could do is I could set up a logon script with scheduled tasks, which is this command line in it, and then I could delay that application from running, or delay that task from running until the end of the week or until next week, whenever they're done with whatever specialized project they're working on. And then at the end of that period of time, the task could then resume as it always had. So just be aware of the fact that you do have this command line version of running scheduled tasks. It's not really anywhere near as useful as the UI because this would involve quite a lot of work to configure some of this stuff all from the command line. And the UI is actually very, very good. But you could do that if you wanted to. You could do a lot of things within this. And then also, there's not really a direct interface for this, but one of the kinds of tasks you could schedule that could have quite a lot of power would be you could cause the action that we have, on whatever the trigger is. You could cause the action to refer to something like a VBS file, or a Visual Basic script, or any other kind of a script or batch file. And within that, there can be an untold number of different things that could take place. You can make that as elaborate or as simple as you want it to be, and you can get quite a lot of power out of it if you point it to a VBS, and that way you can find things for it to do that are not otherwise in the system here, that are not otherwise already built-in items that you can find. And this might be an important exam objective here as well, in terms of being able to hook it into VBS files. Because maybe I have something happen where when people log on, I want there to be a report sent, kind of like almost like an electronic time card. When the user logs on, I want it to send some kind of a message to me. Maybe I want a VBS script to create a log of that of some kind. Then what I can do is to have the trigger be when a user logs on, then it sends a message, then we know everyone logged on at 9 o'clock or whatever, and the person that logged on at 9:05, well, we'll take that 5 minutes away from them at their lunch break or something like that. So anyway, just an idea there for the different kinds of things you can do. In this nugget, we took a look at performance and tasks, where we started off by looking at Performance Monitor, which we've had in various versions for a long time right now. But remember, Performance Monitor is good for monitoring real-time activity that's going on the system right now. And that's very useful. You can look at the a line graph with that and see where your current trend is in a specific period of time. But it doesn't actually store any data for you in that kind of a view. So you have to go to a data collector set. Microsoft's got some excellent data collector sets that we can use kind of already built in for us. And of course, you can modify those if you want to with using your templates. And then what we saw here is once it collects the data, then it creates reports that you can then refer back to. And you can even then use the relog command to be able to go ahead and export that into a different file format for other analysis. We also saw Reliability Monitor, great way to track the trend of a machine, overall reliability of a computer, and to see what kinds of problems it's experiencing on the whole without having to comb your way through the event log. And then there's the Task Scheduler and Scheduled Tasks command line item, and the Task Scheduler is excellent in Windows Vista and Server 2008. Gives you a great deal of flexibility, very intuitive, and don't forget scheduled tasks here as well is something that you can also run, and you can even put that in something like a startup or a logon script to further extend its reach to a system. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.